Well, welcome everyone. Happy New Year. This is our first Climate Accord webinar of 2026. Thrilled to have all the panelists you see on the screen here, Andrea, Lewis, Ryan, Howard, and Rob joining us to talk about supply chain decarbonization. The topic will be primarily about equipment. We will get into it with some updates on the work that has been done to date, some specifics from our various companies who are here and joining us, and then of course some opportunity for you to jump in and get into the conversation and ultimately our action items for it. So if we haven't met before, I'm Miranda Gardner. I'm the Executive Director of the iMasons Climate Accord. Really thrilled to have all of you here and ready to get into this topic today. Before we do get started though, as with all iMasons events, we just want you to take a moment and read our code of conduct. This is so that we are committed to those discussions and information shared here, not as views and opinions of specific directors, aka Chatham House rule is here and in effect for this webinar. As we said, we do have it recording. That's for us to follow up on some notes. And of course, we will be sure to pay attention to anything that is proprietary information that needs to be modified, deleted, etc. One other thing that I'll just state, but it goes without saying in the code of conduct too, in a safe harbor, if we do see or hear anything either in the chat or comments as you come off that is offensive, harmful, etc., we will remove you from participating in our event. That is the case with all events. But anyways, if you'd like to, you can also scan that QR code to read it more in depth. This is the same that we have at every single iMasons event. Our agenda today, we will be going through the work that has been done to date. So our OCP ICA-based specification, an opportunity from our colleagues from RELCO to share what they have done in moving the needle on EPDs. And then our colleague Howard from Meta, who's going to be sharing kind of a case study piece on a fan coil unit. We'll get into kind of what's next, what we've started doing with our supply chain decarbonization consortium. And then, of course, kind of asking some questions, looking at kind of calls to action for 2026, and of course, how we progress all of this work forward to actually drive change within decarbonizing our industry. And then, of course, a quick thank you to all of you for participating and what we can do as next steps. First up, I'm going to hand this over to our colleague, Andrea from Schneider. Andrea, you ready?
Yes, thank you. So I want to talk a bit about some work that's been done really involving multiple players from our industry for kind of encouraging carbon disclosure between suppliers and data center owner operators. Just to back up and kind of paint the picture of what this is. So the Open Compute Project is an industry organization really focused on specifications for the equipment that goes into data centers and data center design. There were a number of us that went to a conference in Lisbon 2 years ago, an OCP conference, and this was pretty soon after the launching of the iMasons Climate Accord. There was a group of probably, I think, 30 people that got into a room and said, how are we going to further this vision that I think Dean had right at kind of the launch of this, of having some kind of nutrition label for data center equipment that could go onto the piece of equipment. We have this easy way to kind of standardize and compare what the carbon impact of the different equipment in the data center would be. So all of these folks got into the room, including Miranda, including Rob. So these two fantastic organizations that bring people together and said, how do we make this a reality? And out of that became an OCP official work stream led by Microsoft, Meta, Google, and Schneider, with participation from both OCP leadership and ICA leadership to figure out how do we make this like carbon label a reality. A lot of kicking the tires and testing and assumptions about what we could do were done. And about a year later, what we came up with was a first base specification for carbon disclosure. We have published this last summer through OCP. It is a contract language specification that any data center owner operator can use in their RFPs, their RFIs, or other contract language to ask their suppliers in a standardized way to identify the product that we're talking about. So whether that's a UPS, a generator, a server, anything like that, what the embodied carbon footprint of that piece of equipment is, and how that embodied carbon figure was measured. We relied on a lot of the work that was being done in the ICA equipment working group to identify different methodologies of calculating embodied carbon. So, LCAs, EPDs, TM65 methodology, an economic input output model, and say, we understand that the industry needs more carbon disclosure. We're not there yet. Let's kind of figure out what actually exists, open up these lines of communication between data center operators and their suppliers to get a lay of the land and figure out what that carbon disclosure looks like. So we released this base specification. We're encouraging data center owner operators to use it in their communications with their suppliers, but it is a base specification, which means we are not done yet. And if we go to the next slide, we can talk about, well, first, let's actually lay the land what this is and what it isn't. So like I said, it's identifying the product, what that embodied carbon figure is, and how that methodology, how the supplier came up with that number, what methodologies they applied. It is meant to promote that embodied carbon disclosure in our industry and start to find a pathway to standardization. It is a flexible specification, meaning that it's not really dictating which of those methodologies the supplier will use, though the data center owner operator does have the ability to add rigor to increase requirements based on their relationship with their supplier or their own internal goals. And what we're meaning to do with that, like I said, is build that capacity towards standardized carbon disclosure. At this time, what it's not doing, again, it's not dictating that methodology. It's not collecting any data. This is a communication tool between those two entities, the data center and their suppliers. And it doesn't collect that information, put it into a database or anything like that. It also doesn't provide verification at this point. So it is really, again, that communication tool. But we also realize that a lot of these things that it's not doing are things that the industry might need to lead ourselves towards doing. So we're working to increase rigor and figure out what the next steps are. If we go to the next slide. One of the things that we realize in this work is that the solution for increasing rigor, for having a greater amount of carbon disclosure is going to be different among the different types of procurements that data center owner operators have. Our desired outcome with all of this is the knowledge that measurement doesn't equal decarbonization. We are encouraging this kind of measurement and disclosure in order to lead to decarbonization. And to do that, it's to enable data center operators to make low carbon procurement decisions. We understand that the needs for that to happen, first and foremost, is to have comparable data. If you're going to make a low carbon procurement decision, the two things that you're deciding between need to be able to be comparable. And to do that, we do believe that that disclosure needs to be publicly available. This is possible in a lot of other industries. We think that we can make it possible here. Not that that's what we're doing this year, but it is kind of that North Star that we want to work towards. And we understand that IT equipment, MEP equipment, and building materials, because of also the work that we've done within this ICA supply chain decarbonization consortium, there are different levels of maturity. There's different things that are possible. So we're looking towards different outcomes for each of these. I'm working most closely with the equipment side, and that's what this group is also focused on. And what we want to be able to do this year is identify where product carbon rule, PCRs, product category rules, I apologize, are available and be able to prioritize the gaps. And then to be a little more rigorous with the methodology that the supplier will use to disclose that carbon information. And then again, move towards publicly available disclosures. And underlying all of that is trying to bring this forward to have OCP marketplace integration. So showcasing on the OCP marketplace where specific products are listed, whether or not that supplier is OCP ready, OCP carbon disclosure ready, to be able to deliver that carbon information once the data center owner operator asks for it. And then also adding in a supplier engagement layer. This doesn't happen just by putting it into your specification. There's a lot of other work that goes into it. And as we're going to discuss today, there's a lot of work that once you have that disclosure, how do you engage with your suppliers to get towards that decarbonization component? If we go ahead and go to the next slide. So one of our calls to action today is using and improving this specification. For DC owner operators, it means using that specification in your language with your suppliers, considering increasing the requirements, not simply asking for you know, an emissions factor assigned to the amount of spend, but something that has a little more research and rigor behind it. TM65 is a good example. And I think we've all kind of recognized that the North Star is EPDs or product carbon footprint. So really working towards that. And we're also going to need folks to participate in PCR development. There are 5 organizations that were listed on that group of folks who are working on this. A lot of resources behind those organizations, but this is an industry-wide problem, and we really need others to be able to participate with us in that development. Same thing on the supplier side, creating more EPDs, being prepared to deliver embodied carbon information, listing that on the OCP marketplace, and again, participating in product category role development, and then helping us to figure out where we have those gaps in the available PCRs, where where we need to prioritize our efforts, which pieces of equipment have the biggest carbon impact, both from for Schneider, which in our portfolio has the biggest carbon footprint, but from a data center owner operator perspective, what in your entire data center hall has the biggest carbon footprint? Because that's going to help us make sure that the juice is most worth the squeeze. And I'll hand it over to Lewis to talk about Relco's sustainability solutions powered by EPDs.
Thanks so much, Andrea. I'm going to actually give it up to Ryan to get us started, to introduce Rauco, give a little background and some of the sustainability solution we offer, and then I'll share a little more on the EPD side.
Great. Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Andrea. First off, I have to just piggyback off what Andrea said. Measurement doesn't equal impact, and I'd like to be able to. I'd hope we'd be able to demonstrate that today. And I think our POV is the value a supplier can create when you leverage an EPD. So before we get into that, just a real quick recap. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Kohler Energy. We are now Relco. So we actually spun off from Kohler about a year and a half ago, and it's been really exciting. I think it's helped us to continue to propel innovative solutions and industrial energy systems to powertrain to home energy. So it's been a really exciting journey. If we go to the next slide. So part of our challenge post divestment was, what is our sustainability brand, our strategy? How do we want to move forward, especially in our industry? And I think it came down to what's on the slide here, putting resilience at the heart of sustainability. And for us, what that means is, how do you take the concept of resilience, especially in backup power, where you need a solution that'll be there for you no matter what, whether there's a storm, grid failure, etc., but also marrying that with sustainability. In my own lived experience, I feel like those concepts, I perceive those concepts, some may feel butt heads a little bit, but the offering that EPD has allowed us to do is bring these concepts together, being able to create a resilient backup system that also helps to deliver on your sustainability goals. And so that's what's really exciting to Relco, to me personally, especially as a sustainability professional. So how does that work? Well, let's jump to the next slide. So as I've mentioned, sustainability begins at the EPD. You don't know what you don't measure. And the EPD is a perfect example of being able to measure to find your impact. And so we started with EPD to figure out, where in our existing diesel technology could we start to help people decarbonize? And Lewis will get into a lot of the details on this, but things like conscious care will help you decarbonize with existing technology and existing diesel fuel. And then you can take it even a step further, add in a drop-in solution like HVO, which increases your carbon reduction, which can all be quantified by an EPD, again, helping you to decarbonize. You can look at other solutions as a hybrid approach, like combined heat and power, battery backup, if the supply is available, hydrogen. So there's many different ways you can tailor your sustainability journey using the EPD. So if there's one thing I'd ask for you to take from this, is sustainability and resiliency can go hand in hand. You can have the backup power you need to eliminate any downtime while also pursuing sustainability goals. And there's no one fits all solution, but with a myriad of solutions, you can get there. So we're not going to be able to cover everything on this slide, and Relco has a lot more sustainability solutions, but Lewis has done a wonderful job handpicking some great case studies to demonstrate this concept. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Lewis.
Thanks so much, Ryan. So to the point earlier, right? You have to start somewhere. You have to understand your footprint and then find ways to improve it. Even though we feel like we've been talking about EPD for so long within the industry with iMason Climate Core as part of the working group, I've been helping in facilitating, publication on TM65 on EPD, LCA, and economic input output model. However, we need to at one point you can spend the next 5, 10 years continue to hone in on your measurement, but we need to start moving towards reduction. We need to start learning from what the insights these life cycle assessment have done to help us understand where can we reduce the footprint. So the case study today we want to share with you, Miranda, if you can go to the next slide, is to trying to give an example how that could look like to move from measurement to decarbonization. So like Ryan mentioned that we published our very first, also the market first environmental product regulation for mission critical generators in 2024. And it took a lot of effort, as many of you working in the industry know that there are not many EPD available for equipment because of the complexity of this equipment. We have more than 10,000 individual components that go into it. You need a lot of supplier inputs. It took us a year and a half to create it, but it doesn't stop there. This is really the starting point of really helping you understand where are the hotspots. And one of the first things that we learned is a lot of time the scope one emission for our data center owner operators are not necessarily coming from emergency situation when you're running generators. Oftentimes it's coming from the emission coming from testing, the maintaining these equipment throughout its life. So, for example, if you go to the next slide, a traditional a practice of maintaining a piece of generator is actually running it for maybe 30 minutes to an hour every month throughout the year to avoid those residual fuel from building up into the engine and equipment, what they call a wet stacking issue. So they need to burn off the residual fuel, have to bring it up to at least 30% of a load, and then having to connect with the load bank. That's really a lot of time, the majority of your emission coming from your on-site operation. But what we are able to do is working with our engine supplier and providing a program what we call conscious care. Essentially, it's a maintenance program to reduce the frequency and load the cycle that you need to reduce the emission coming from the testing practice itself. So the way that we're able to make this work is actually improving the technology on the valve control for the engine itself to avoid some of these residual fuel from backing up. And what we're able to offer is instead of testing your generator every month, if you're using our generator that is based on that technology, you can reduce that frequency and duration. You can test it for only 10 minutes every 4 months, and then still do a full loaded test at the end of the year. And this exercise itself can reduce your testing emission by about 79% and the associated greenhouse gas that come with it. And if you're using HVO or other renewable diesel, you can reduce that up to 98% of the greenhouse gas from the testing practice of the generator itself. So this is a really impactful exercise you can do with the product, with the equipment infrastructure you have today. And that's something that we're able to offer through understanding the impact coming from the use of our gensets. Now, the story doesn't stop here, right? If you go to the next slide, EPD also allow us to look at other aspects of the environmental footprint throughout the life cycle of our piece of equipment, right? So what you were seeing, what we showed earlier is the kind of like the second line compared to the first line that we're able to reduce the life cycle emission from just reducing the testing. Now, another area that we realize is also a significant impact is actually heating the generator up to speed. I'm sure many of you are hoping you are staying warm in the last couple of days when the cold, winter is coming through. That to keep up, your equipment and system up to a temperature in order for it to start up within 10 seconds when the power outbreak. There's actually a block heater in every piece of engine and generator on site that need to maintain that piece of equipment within a specific range of temperature. And if you can imagine the electricity that go to preheating all of these generators throughout the life of the product actually make up a significant amount of the life cycle greenhouse gas. So what we are able to come up with is a low carbon engine heater solution, essentially creating a package solution to combine a heat exchanger with our generator product to use some of the waste heat from data center operation itself to preheat the generator so that we can reduce the emission that come with the block heater throughout the life of the product. And then there are other solutions that we're currently looking into, potentially low carbon coolant that need to be replaced for maintenance purpose and low carbon skid. But what really the EPDs allow us to do is looking at the different options that we can reduce the impact and also prioritizing which are the area that have the largest impact that we can focus our resource and energy on. If you go to the next slide. The exercise of creating EPD also doesn't stop. So today we offer EPD for our product ranging all the way from KD 2000 to 4500 kVA size of generators. And we are currently also working on developing the next sets of EPD for a smaller product from KD 800 to 1800 kVA. So hopefully we'll be able to publish that sometime this year as well. So this is a continuing effort that we are providing this information for our customer, but also internally when we do product development, new product development, I've been leading a program called Design for Environment to drive emission measurement and carbon data gathering from our suppliers as well. So we'll actually use TM65, reaching out to our suppliers for every new components that we are adding on, asking them to provide us insight on the material breakdown and the origin and the energy emission information so that we can use for future EPD development. So all of these kind of go hand in hand to what Andrea has shared about earlier. There are different methodology on how do you gather those data. Not only do we produce EPD for our clients, we are also gathering information from our suppliers. We kind of lead to the last slide that I have for you today. Another benefit of really leveraging EPD to drive emission measurement and reduction is there's a ripple effect as we're working in the supply chain. Through the process of pursuing our very first market first EPD, we actually enabled one of our key alternator supplier, Naide Lohasomed, to publish their very first EPD as well. And this is not possible without us requiring them to providing us the information needed to create our own EPD. And by adopting this practice, encouraging more suppliers to leverage EPD, we will have a ripple effect to have more equipment supplier be able to provide this as well. And not only from our suppliers, our competitors as well. Since we published our very first EPD back in 2024, and through working with IMS's Climate Core, I and learned that our competitors, some of our generator manufacturers, other manufacturers out there are working on developing the EPD as well. So the key message here to take away is the conversation of driving embodied carbon measurement reduction shouldn't stop by requesting an EPD from your supplier. That should really be the starting point of, all right, now you have the EPD. Tell us what are the hotspots that we can work with you to reduce the footprint? What are some solutions you can provide through your product and services to reduce the life cycle impact? And even if you don't have an EPD readily available, what are some other opportunity that you're aware of that we can work with you on? And how can we leverage other tools, maybe like TM65 in the meantime, if you don't have to provide that information.
Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate that. I love the kind of closing message there. You've heard in these first two presentations, the collaborative spirit really drives a lot of change, drives a lot of impact. If you haven't read or taken a look at this work, it is all published on the Climate Accord website. So climateaccord.org, go under resources. You will find the write-up and the full details on what Lewis and Ryan just presented to us. You will find more information on the OCP ICA partnership. Fortunately, we also have our colleague Rob Coyle here for our Q&A. We're going to highlight what's next for all this work, and then we're going to open up for a bit of a discussion. Some of you have been pinging us in the chat. We've asked you to go put those questions into the Q&A. We have at least one, hopefully a second, ICA governing body member on our meeting with us who's going to join the conversation to kind of discuss what's going on. But two things really that we'd like to highlight for you is one, our supply chain decarbonization consortium. So all of this great work that you have heard about today and has been going on has also spawned another initiative or effort from the iMasons Climate Accord. I'm going to give all the credit to Andrea for really getting this off the ground. Last year, she and her colleague Rose Shaver from Schneider Electric kicked us off in July of last year. And really the point of this consortium was to get You see this every kind of aspect of the supply chain, whether you're the purchaser, whether you're the delivery, whether you are looking at this from, you're implementing it because you're on the GC end, you're an engineer designing for these systems, you name it. They wanted them in this room together in July. And so we had this meeting of about 40 some people. It ranged. That whole spectrum was in that room talking about the challenges, looking at the possible solutions, sharing the tools that were out there. Lewis was there sharing what they did with Relco. Our colleagues from Clark Pacific were there talking about the work that they are doing. That was really more on the material side, but really getting into the depths of that. Our colleague from Technor Apex was there. That's a plastics company, really their journey on sustainability, how they are driving change internally. We've taken that, we've continued to assess what's going on there. We've looked at various procurement types. That's that kind of fall of last year. And then in December, for those that missed our in-person summit in Los Angeles, we had a whole workshop that this was sort of the Cliff Notes version of the presentations that were talked about and were shared at those sessions, looking into everything that you heard today. So again, how do we use EPDs? What's the opportunities for generation? Where is that supplier engagement? Which brings me to the last slide before we get into discussion. How do we move this forward? Well, obviously together. So a lot of things you'll be seeing from the ICA this year are really going to be what we consider collective calls to action, meaning us as a body, not Relco alone or Meta alone or Schneider Electric alone, although these are big companies, we know you can move the needle. How do we do this together? How do we do things like what you see on here, increase the opportunities and the use of sustainability language, criteria in our contracts or specifications? Our working groups are already putting this into effect in their work plans coming up. You'll hear more about it on our all hands webinar next month. I can share that link when we break from sharing this side. Using the available tools that are out there. What generators do we have to get things like more EPDs, using life cycle assessments, or perhaps there isn't a tool for the piece of the supply chain that you're involved in? How do we create those tools and get them out to market use? Start committing your products to having EPDs. Maybe it's just one of them. Maybe you've got 20. It's a process. It takes time. All of us are not in the same place, but let's start putting those products out there, making them publicly available, making sure they have that third-party verification in there. And then lastly, sharing those successes and those lessons learned. This is the way we grow together, is hearing about how we do this, because we know that will lead to scaling. It will showcase somebody a roadmap because they're not there yet and they want to be there. Tell somebody up in leadership or somebody who's new to the industry, hey, it's been done, it can be done, and we can do it too. So just stay tuned for all of this exciting stuff, because as this team has spoken about time and time again, it's great that we get together and have these webinars. It's great that we get together in person and talk through all of this. It's even better when we put it into action. So let me stop my share and bring up our screen. Ace, if you wouldn't mind promoting our colleague, Charlie Sellers from the Climate Accord governing body to a panelist too. We're going to do a little Q&A with everyone. And of course, again, feel free to raise your hand if you're in the audience. We're happy to bring you off chat, but you can also put some questions in there too. I'm going to start us maybe with Charlie's question, because he put it in here and directed it. Or maybe Charlie, do you want to ask this question live to Howard right here?
Sure. And you guys caught me with one bite left in my sandwich. I didn't eat fast enough, but I'll save it for the end. Um, Let me actually remind myself, because when they make you a panelist, it puts you away. So I think I remember it. So Howard,
I can read it.
a fair question for everybody is, when we do these analysis via our EPDs, I've never ever seen one that can show all the way to zero. So I think the EPD in the role of like understanding what we can do today is really critical. But what role do you think EPDs can play in helping us understand what to do about the part that we don't know anything about yet?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question, Charlie. And I think that's part of the work that needs to be done in terms of getting deeper into the supply chain, right? And the work that, like Relco is doing, where they push their sub-tier suppliers, NEDEC, to go and publish their EPDs, right? A lot of these unaddressable areas are just because the data is not known, right? We don't know where the emissions are coming from. We don't have that data sources. And so as we as data center owner operators, we're pushing on our suppliers, a part of our program also with our suppliers is that we're asking them to go drive supplier engagement programs with their own vendors, right? That's really how we can go and unlock and see what is it that we don't know today. And then I think following that is also like the 80/20 rule, right? Like figuring out from the data that we know and focusing on the high priority areas like this fan coil unit for us. But that's not the end of it, right? That's just the starting point. And so I think the combination of the two, right? Pushing the industry forward in things like the iMasons Climate Accord and working with our suppliers, right? In unlocking that data and then making sure that we're balancing the amount of effort needed to go and chase after these things, right? And that's again, I'll put in a plug from a supplier engagement standpoint is there are engineering efforts that I talked about as one example of how we can decarbonize. There are other ones that are lower lifts for the customer, we'll say, in this situation, right? In the terms of if you work with your suppliers and you ask them to commit to the use of renewable energies, right? Those are things, of course, that is work for the supplier to go do, but that is a relatively low lift for your own organization because as your suppliers commit to the use of renewable energies, that in itself is going to decarbonize your own scope three, right? As they're decarbonizing their scope
Mhm.
two. And so I think it's a multifaceted answer to that question, Charlie, of multiple ways of how you go address these unknowns. Is first is identification. We have to get that data. But as Lewis also mentioned, right, I think we've talked about measurement frameworks for a long time, right? We really need to move towards the actual decarbonization and really
Yeah.
going after the areas that we know are going to help us decarbonize.
So if I'm hearing you, Howard, it's if you want to make your EPD look really good, you got to get your suppliers to get you their
Exactly.
EPDs, and you got to
Exactly.
get them to get their suppliers your EPDs, and that helps you get more and more of the addressable pie. So,
Exactly. Right. The more assumptions that you have to keep making as you're making your EPDs, the less accurate it's going to be, right? Just because it's an EPD and it's third party verified doesn't mean that all the information there is perfectly accurate if you're having to make assumptions.
thank you for answering my not at all planted question.
I also say too, it's not just about the having the, it's about having that pathway for decarbonization. A lot of that is because the suppliers don't see the investment in transforming their technologies and electrifying their operations and making those kinds of transformations that are cost a lot, but they need to have the market signal from their customers that say this is a worthwhile investment. And so, because it's for, I would say for Schneider, a lot of times that also involves us switching our own suppliers and shifting up our own supplier relationships. And we need to know that that investment is going to pay off. Not, always directly or anything, but just that like the community is supportive of it, that the market is there for us to make these dramatic shifts and for our suppliers even more so to make those dramatic shifts.
I just want to put a little cherry on top, everything that's been said, because it's so applicable from, especially as a supplier, from the customer side, hearing the signal and then being able to signal your own suppliers. I would also say, pack supplier program. And what that's really designed to do is work with, especially those mom and pop type suppliers, to help them understand what EPD data even is. I think that's part of the challenge is there's such a variety in the types of suppliers and what they're able to provide or what they even know how to provide. So I think that's another layer of complexity that we'll have to work together to solve.
I love it. Well, we also have our colleague Allison Freeman, who is also on the ICA governing board, joining our conversation here. We don't even need our questions that we prep for this because you guys are throwing them at us left and right. Love to see this in the chat too. Our colleague Nadia Yang from Stanford University posed the question to us: who feels these pain points the most when it comes to the kind of work that we're doing here? And in the future, what happens? Nadia, correct me if I'm getting this wrong. If we're not decarbonizing, Rob, I think you see this a lot, obviously, from the open compute side. Obviously, Allison over at Dell, you probably see this too, what kind of the end users and the customers that you're getting. Maybe we can go 1, 2 to start you two off on this question, but let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, briefly, I would say I'll double down on the togetherness point that was made early. It's not just about the individual companies, but also the organizations. So it's a main driver of why the Climate Accord, iMasons, and OCP came together, is that we need industry broad adoption, and not just adoption, but we need a common language. So base specifications like this may be fairly permissive and are fairly foundational, right? They're really not going to move the meter on day one, but they do create a framework and a common language in which we can start to make progress. So the pain, I would say, is some of the things that have already echoed that Ryan said is not all the suppliers are the same size and have the same resources within or as mature as they are in their journey or even part of what they are providing. So providing this framework also educates them and allows them to participate. And participation is really, I think, job one of this group. And the OCP and iMason's Climate Accord, we're here to just help create the framework so that these experts could do that.
Absolutely, Rob. And I know in the work plans, things like performance spec, design specifications are sort of this next evolution of it. Now we got to ratchet it up a notch, but this baseline spec has been out in market, give or take 6 months. So I'm going to see that impact too. Allison, from your side, any thoughts on this question?
Yeah, a little bit similar to Rob about just getting things at a baseline, but when the question was who feels the pain points or where are they? For me, it's that I've got multiple customers asking me for similar information in different ways, which costs me a lot of time to get it all exactly in the way they want it. So the more we can align as an industry on here are the things that we expect from our suppliers, me as a supplier to the data centers, and then also my suppliers that have the power supplies and everything, the more we can get that streamlined, the more we can accurately measure, and then we can start improving. But we're whack-a-mole right now. Oh, this customer needs this, let's give it to them. This customer needs this. And so this effort to align is going to go a really long way.
Absolutely.
And I think too, for that, it can be both in the asks that they're bringing to us for measurement, but also decarbonization, like Howard said, like renewable energy procurement requirements, just pathways to decarbonization. And perhaps there's ways within this group that we work on. What are those pathways to decarbonization, and how do we standardize what those pathways can be for individual types of procurements, and then invest as a group in pushing those forward.
Yeah, absolutely. As Rob said, I think during our practice for this session, and as one of our former governing body members used to say often, you don't ask, you don't get. And really, what's the worst that happens? Somebody doesn't have it. Well, now it's at least top of mind. You've opened up this question and this dialogue. That's what we found during pilot too. A lot of times it was even like, oh, do I have a carbon number? Like, what is a carbon number? Like, it was for us who play in this space almost a little bit shocking that this is so commonplace for us and yet not so much for the rest of the industry. And we've started digging into some of those stats, and ICA companies listening and learning from this. We all have room to improve. We're not done yet. We got work to do. So I have a couple more questions before we wrap it up today. Alan, you've given us two, and then Amanda, I see you've got a question for us as well. So let's try and get to all of these. I think we've answered some of these, kind of what are the next steps and barriers that we need to overcome in terms of this work. I don't know, Lewis, if you want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, sure. I think the next step, I think our group over here have demonstrated a base specification as one way to standardize the language and how do you ask for those information. Now we need more company to adopt that base specification in their RFP, in their request of information, right? And we showcase a case study here how supplier could offer you solution to decarbonize the product. But if you don't ask, like Marina, what you just said, if you don't ask, you're not going to get for it. So instead of just stopping there and asking, do you have EPD? Ask, what solution do you have that can reduce the footprint of your product through the life cycle? Even if they don't have EPD, you can maybe ask from what you learned from other EPD, similar equipment that are available out there. Have you thought of reducing the impact on the use of the generator, for example? What are some alternative solutions that you can provide? I think these questions are important because not only you are hopefully that you can get what you asked for, but it's a signal for the suppliers to go to their leadership saying, we are being asked by our customer on X, Y, and Z. That's why we need to invest in sustainability resource. So I think that really signal and asking and standardizing the ask is really the key here.
And, I'll add to that, Lewis, it's anyone in sustainability can tell you that their favorite thing in the world is when their customer asks them to be more sustainable. Because that is the easiest thing to defend when it comes to directing investment. Like, ask me more, frankly. I'm going to get myself in trouble by saying this, but ask Microsoft for more shit too. But I've had people come to me and say, Charlie, you're not asking us enough right now. Please ask us more. And it's like, if you insist. And then we do.
Just
And
plus
let's not
one to
put the
what Charlie said. Wholeheartedly agree.
Retweet.
I can't make any changes unless customers demand them. Within my company, this is how we make the change.
And let's not put the onus just on the ask though, too. I've been on that other side. I'm an architect by training. Be like, why aren't we doing this in project? Well, the customer didn't ask. It's like, well, that's not also it. So like ask why they're not asking. I mean, like again, like there's layers upon these questions of where we can all push each other to be much better at any of this. And you can just hear from this dialogue what that opportunity is. Alan, you also asked too, and kind of into the standard disclosure for direct supplier reduction and product embodied carbon, have we had discussions about applying the standard on environmental attribute credits, EACs? Now, I'm going to let someone else jump in on this. I don't think we've gone there yet, but I could have missed a session or two in terms of our discussions. Anyone else recall if we've gone into EACs at this point? Okay.
I'll chime in. I think it's a noble next step for the industry. I think the ICA, when we did our call for green concrete as an example, we were really looking at physical procurement. And I think that's always the right place to start. But I think we also recognize, given the complexity of our supply chains, given the complexity of our operations, we can't always very easily get physical, especially for this heavy stuff, getting the physical stuff in every single place. And so I know certainly at my company, we've done some first of a kind deals for green steel environmental attributes as an example. And I think that's probably the next financial evolution of that space. And it's one that I think we do need to flow into as an iMasons Accord more broadly. But I would imagine we're going to first expand our focus on what are all the like kind of the direct materials we need to go decarbonize, and then as a kind of a fast follow to bring in the financial weight behind it. Also think about what does it mean to tackle or tack on EACs to these green materials that can then get reflected in the EPDs. So that's my hot take.
I like that hot take. And I know we're closing in on time, and I want to be mindful of the last three. Holly, I saw your questions come through. I've taken note of them. I'm going to go to Amanda's first because it came in. If we've got that last minute, we'll get to yours as well. Amanda asked, regarding the OCP specification, what are the implementation learnings and effectiveness, particularly from suppliers manufacturing custom products and beginning their decarbonization journey? Rob, have we seen any of that just yet?
Well, we're still early stages, but we have our first example in Flex adopting it right away at OCP Global Summit and proudly presenting the fact that they're ready to disclose carbon. So we're starting to see those early learnings. They're using it as a competitive advantage in the marketplace. They're broadcasting and advertising. I have information available that could be useful to potential customers. But we're trying, as I said, the primary job of this group was to be adoption as job number one, and I think we're starting to see that. So as far as customize, OCP exists around modular hardware, right? So the companies leverage OCP specifications for standardization so that they can make customizations within their environment, yet they're building from standardized modular architecture. And I think that's the advantage of using a tool like this in an ecosystem like OCP, is you still get that customization, but you have standardization so you can make choices in the marketplace.
If I could add that too, like we create a lot of standardized equipment, also a lot of customized equipment. And I think the flexibility of the specification allows a supplier like Schneider to say for our off-the-shelf solutions that are being purchased by many customers, we do have an EPD. We can give that to you right away. If only Meta is buying a specific configuration of something, we can start out with something like the TM65 methodology and build up to that EPD, particularly given the constraints of time. I think there could also be a discussion around, like you were saying, around components. Like if we can categorize each of these components and create both measurement and decarbonization pathways for them, like that can also help us as well. And I know that there's organizations out there trying to work on that, and maybe we bring those discussions in.
Thanks, Andrea. Great way to round this out. Holly, I'm sorry we didn't get to your question. Two things really quick. We talked equipment today, but hot off the presses, you guys are hearing this first. If you haven't seen this, there's a case study teaser on the ICA website about best practices for data center LCAs from our materials working group. Obviously, the other part of the supply chain here is what's going on with materials. The second piece that I want to share with you, even maybe hotter off the press because it went live this morning. If you are not on a working group, if you're not involved with our OCP ICA work stream here, if you're not engaged in some sort of piece of this effort, there is now a volunteer link on the ICA website. You can go in, select all of your subject matter expertise, throw it in there. We're developing our database. So as our working group efforts, our sub-working group efforts, our partnership efforts continue to grow and continue to drive this change, you can be part of this in a more robust way. So take a look at that link, share it with people too. Caveat, I'm not going to guarantee that, we're going to put you on a working group. That's not to say we don't want to know what's out there, because we do a lot of work, as you can see just from this webinar. Thanks again for all of you who participate. Thanks for the snafu and fixing that with our technical issues. To our colleague Asa Weiss in the background, who's been taking notes and making sure all of you are getting us your Q&A. We really appreciate that. Andrea, Lewis, Ryan, Howard, Rob, Charlie, Allison, thanks again for participating in our webinar today. We'll see you guys all really soon. Have a great rest of your week. Take care.
So much.
Thank you.